President Obama's theology. The theology of President Obama's Christian theocracy. Part 1. The background of liberation theology. Before I begin, I want you to realize that if you are to truly understand the President of the United States, you must know what theology is driving his policies and politics. But that will require you to carefully think about what I'm about to tell you. Prior to the 2008 election, we heard a lot about President Obama's pastor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, and his social gospel, or more correctly identified as Black Liberation theology. Senator Obama, prior to his election, related to us how that he was saved under the preaching and teaching of the social gospel by the Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Now I want you to pay close attention to the use of these types of evangelical terminology that President Obama used. The question needs to be asked, first, what does he mean by saved? And then asked, saved from what? The social gospel is not the historic social gospel of the early 1900s in America. However, it is a newly developed social gospel that is established rather than on just liberal theology, on a Marxist political philosophy. By way of introduction, the question must be asked is this: what is liberation theology? Liberation theology is a movement that attempts to answer various problems that we have faced in our culture today by uniting theology with socio-political philosophy, as it seeks to address oppressive behavior relating to cultural, economic, and political constraints under the power of an ethnic nationalism or racism. Again, listen to what I said. Cultural, economic, and political constraints under the power of an ethnic nationalism or racism. Liberation theology is not just another theory about God, man, and salvation. Not at all. It is clearly dealing with cultural, economic, and political constraints. These are the sins that hold the marginalized people from having success. It is an abusive form of nationalism or racism. However, when we speak of liberation theology, it must be in the plural, for there are various theologies of liberation that are being expressed among not only the Black community, but feminists, Asians, Hispanic Americans, and even Native Americans. However, the most articulated expression of liberation theology was developed in Latin America. The theological themes that were developed in Latin America must be understood in the socio-political and religious context that served as models for these other theologies of liberation. There are at least four major factors that have played a significant role in the formation of liberation theology's formulas of theology. First, it is a post-Enlightenment theological movement that was influenced by the epistemological and sociological perspectives of Immanuel Kant, William Hegel, and Karl Marx. Second, liberation theology has been greatly influenced by modern European political theology and the North American radical theology as set forth in the theology of Jürgen Moltmann and Harvey Cox, whose theological perspectives have criticized the ahistorical and individualistic nature of existential theology. Now, we need to take just a few moments to consider the impact of Jürgen Moltmann's theology as foundational influence in the development of this liberation thinking. In the late 1960s, a new approach to theology emerged whose leaders were German scholars. What these German theologians were attempting to do in their theology was to develop an understanding of the mission of the church by creating a shift in interpretive perspectives. This new theology created a new paradigm that has as its center a new kind of theology that emphasizes the concept of resurrection. What this means is that the church, that is the visible body of professing Christians, the Christian community as a whole, needed a better understanding of the importance of Christ's resurrection, in that it is the beginning and promise of what is yet to come. This kind of in-view has a dynamic influence on, first, not only how one understands God, man, and salvation in the spirit realm, but also the dynamic influence on, secondly, man's interaction with man in the physical reality of modern society. In this concept, the Christian is to be seen as a hoper who is impatient with evil and death in this present age. Therefore, the church, and not the individual Christian, is seen as that entity which is confronting society with all of its human securities, empires, and contrived absolutes that create obstacles for the fulfillment of the real purpose of Christ's kingdom. Keep thinking cultural, economic, and political constraints, because that's the reoccurring object of nationalism and racism as identified in Black liberation theology. Essentially, what the church is waiting for is a coming city that exposes all other cities made with the hands of sinful man. In this concept of theology, a dialogue can easily exist with other philosophical systems that have developed some form of a utopian vision of the future. This is especially true of Marxism and the socialistic utopianism vision that it portrays. This theological concept stands against the individualism of the liberal pietist and other existentialistic theologies. This theology of hope that has been developed out of the German scholars and their thinking concerning liberation speaks of an understanding of God as being the Father of us all, and the God who will make all things new. Again, you have that liberal influence here, God the Father of us all. In this theology, God is known from His promises. This theology speaks to a world vividly aware of the not yet dimensions of human and social existence, and of the fact that the true hope, at its basic human level, is the true essence of meaningful existence. Hope for a better world is sustained by a renewed confidence in the eschatological or apocalyptic vision of Scripture. For Moltmann, eschatology, that is the end of time, is the key or central concept from which everything else in Christian thought is set. The church is seen as the people of hope, experiencing hope in the God who is present in His promises. The coming kingdom gives the church a much broader vision of reality than a merely private vision of personal salvation. Thus, the church is to contest all forms of oppression and or barriers that have been constructed by man for securing his superiority. This theology of hope challenges all structures that absolutize themselves and all barriers erected between peoples, racism, in the name of the reality that is to come in Jesus Christ. Thus, the coming kingdom creates for the church a future vision that requires confronting and transforming society as the true mission of the people of God in the entity of the church. It is using the president's very terms that he used when he ran for president in 2008. This is the theology of change. Sounds less threatening when you call it the theology of change, does it not? Third, liberation theology is, for the most part, a Roman Catholic theological movement in that its major outgrowth was in South America. Liberation theology has been identified with the Roman Catholic Church because a significant number of Latin American leaders within the Roman Catholic Church turned to liberation theology as the theological voice for the Latin American Church. Fourth, liberation theology is a theological movement specifically and uniquely situated in the Latin American context. Liberation theologians in Latin America contended that their continent had been victimized by colonization, imperialism, and multinational corporations, capitalism. This economic development has placed underdeveloped third world nations in a situation of dependence rather than of independence, resulting in the local economies in various Latin American countries being controlled by decisions made out of New York City or Houston or London. In order to perpetuate this economic exploitation, liberationists argue the powerful capitalist countries, especially the United States, give military and economic support to secure certain political regimes supportive of this Western economic status quo. These four factors help to bring about the distinctive theological method and interpretation of the Scriptures that are clearly distinctive. Distinctive not only from Protestant theology of the Reformation and post-Reformation theological church, but even Rome itself has renounced this radical theology as being not acceptable with their own theological perspectives.